Again, good morning to this very important conference, not only for Norad, but also for Norway, and hopefully we'll also send signals here to other important actors that are focused on development. And it's an honor for me to be here discussing results related to health and education. The last 2 days have been very touching here in Norway. As many of you know, yesterday we had the Nobel Peace Prize given to OPCW, the organization that are working for prohibition on chemical weapons. The reason why I'm also mentioning this is that as this conference takes place, we're seeing one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern history unfolding in Syria. And I don't think we can have such a conference without touching on the unacceptable situation that we see in Syria when it comes to very limited access for humanitarian assistance. I was just myself in Jordan and visited one of the refugee camps, 550,000 refugees of Syrian origin in Jordan, speaking to the people that have, and the refugees that had just arrived in this camp, and telling about also the use of chemical weapons make very, very strong impression of you. I met a family of 4 telling about friends that were also affected by chemical attacks. And I was reflecting on this last night, that even if we now have the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe there, at least we are now securing that Assad cannot use chemical weapons against civilians anymore. So those are the small marks and developments that are important. We also yesterday had a big global memorial in Johannesburg, and I don't think we can have a conference here without also then thinking of the legacy of Mr. Mandela. And I think the best way for us to honor the legacy of Nelson Mandela is to be inspired by his values, inspired by his principles that are tolerance, inclusiveness, forgiveness, but we also know that he cared a lot about poverty eradication and about HIV AIDS work, and I think in the health sector he has been a tremendous inspiration the last decade. So we will definitely have that as a basis for the work that we are doing also in this field. One man can make such a huge difference. And this is an inspiration, but we know also that the right policies can make also a huge difference. I remember myself, as Vila also mentioned, in 2002, as a young Minister of Environment, I was in Johannesburg, and we were then negotiating targets related to MDGs, and we also worked on this in 2000, and people were saying, oh, this is not possible to halve the amount of people that live in extreme poverty by 2015. It's impossible. And that target on the Millennium Development Goals we already have reached. This shows that when the global village comes together, set clear targets, it is possible to make huge differences. What we should now make sure is that we do as well as possible in the remaining 750 days. I'll come back to what we need to achieve. Our Prime Minister Erna Solberg has also accepted to be heading know a group under the Secretary General looking at how we can make sure that we reach as far as possible in the remaining 750 days. But we are also in parallel, we're now starting the important work to set the targets for 2030. And we should be as ambitious, and we should think as much out of the box as we did in the year 2000. And I think we should not accept anything less than an ambition of eradicating all extreme poverty by 2030. I think this should be the clear. Thank you. And I think if we work together on this, I think we can achieve it. We can achieve it, and we know that also what we're discussing here today, health and education are very important pieces in this big and more ambitious work of reaching such a target. We know that, for example, in education, 9 out of 10 children now go to primary school. This is good. We know that there are still a lot of challenges. We know that they might go to school, but maybe the class is of 100 pupils. Maybe it's 150. Maybe they go to school for 2 to 3 years. We know that educational systems also need to be fixed. So it's a big challenge, but we're moving in the right direction. I met with Gordon Brown the other day in London, that is the UN Secretary General's special representative on education. And we also agreed that we need to do a lot of things in parallel when it comes to education. We have to make sure that there are schools, there are quality teachers. We need also to use the huge opportunity that we now see on online education. Because if you combine excellent teachers with also then online education, you can have the best minds of the world teaching, and then you can have a follow-up of an able teacher. We have to be innovative, making sure that also the poor children of the world get access to not only education, but better quality education. And we also need to fix those systems that are supposed to deliver education in developing countries. Because one thing is that you can achieve a lot in supporting a school, but we know that the capacity in a country to really build a sustainable educational system is very important. And to do so, you need, of course, economic growth, but you also need the tax base. If your taxes amount to 10% of GDP, and half of it go to military expenses, there is 5% left to use on education, health, and etc. And then you have not the basis for also your own contribution to educational purposes. So coming back to health, we know that on maternal and child mortality, we have reduced the rates significantly. The number of women dying in connection with giving birth is nearly halved. That's also a major achievement. And on HIV and AIDS, we know that it has been reversed, and 1/3 of the infected are now receiving treatment. This is also a major achievement, but there is a way to go. Those medicines have to be available for all people that are also in the developing world now struggling with this disease. Access to safe drinking water, we have reached record levels. There's still a way to go, and it's getting, of course, increased. It's more complicated due to the fact that climate change is also happening at the same time. The death burden on poor countries has become lighter. A large number of developing countries enjoy high growth rates and better conditions for trade. So global economic development is also, of course, very important for developing countries. We know that 6 out of the 10 fastest growing economies now in the world are in Africa. But what we also have to make sure is that when there are natural resources that are behind this growth, it needs to be dealt in a sustainable way, and we need to make sure that the growth is inclusive and that it trickles down, and that the governmental rate when it comes to natural resources belong to the people of that country and not to the leaders, to say it quite diplomatically. So this progress on MDGs shows that the world can unite around ambitious goals, invest, innovate, and deliver decisively. It shows that partnerships between donors, agencies, and NGOs are often very powerful, and that we must encourage more public-private partnerships. And why is that? We still are in a global situation where a lot of countries are implementing cuts in their budgets as part of austerity. They have huge deficits, and the way they're coping with it is then to cut their budgets. And we know that, unfortunately, also ODA is affected by this. So we need to be innovative also then bringing the private sector on board. This is not new policies. This has been on the agenda since Monterey and since the MDGs were created in 2000. But we need to even think more innovative in this way. We know there are private sector money available. We have to have a strategy because we cannot run after those private donors and then we will not have a sound policy. What we have to create are real partnerships where we can unlock investments in important sectors. And we know, for example, in Africa, coming to, for example, food production, 60% of the arable land globally that are not cultivated are in Africa. This has to be unlocked. We need investments, and here we can also collaborate with the private sector, but of course you need then infrastructure investments. You also need investments in irrigation. You need a comprehensive plan for unlocking those kind of investments. And I think working then with the private sector, aligned with the different plans for the countries, it is definitely the future. And we can then also reach the goal of eradicating extreme poverty by 2030 faster in this way. But I think we have to be realistic that much remains to be done, because now I've been focusing on a lot of the positive development, and I'm not gonna, of course, be too pessimistic this morning, but when we're assessing 2030, we also need to be very, very realistic and not naive. We know that discrimination continues against women and girls, people with disabilities, and other vulnerable groups. This is not currently sufficiently covered. In some cases, it's even getting worse. Countries in conflict can never achieve progress on health and education, quite the contrary. We know, for example, Syria was a middle-income country 5 years ago. Now it is a developing country, and we know that there are a humanitarian crisis. We know that if there is war or conflict, 30 years of GDP growth just disappears in weeks. So investments in making sure that there are no conflicts and wars is the most cost-effective investment we can do in making sure that there is development. So the government of Norway, we're doing a lot in conflict resolution already, but this is a major priority. Maybe we're not successful in all those projects, but when we can contribute, for example, when the FARC and President Santos are now negotiating and trying to make a deal in Colombia after 50 years of almost civil war, and we know that there are hundreds of thousands of people that have lost their lives. That is the best investment one can make. The quality of education, as I mentioned, is often below acceptable standards. This has also to be taken into the new MDGs. Women's participation in the labor force has been challenged by the financial crisis. And as I mentioned, 2/3 of HIV/AIDS patients are not receiving sufficient treatment. So we can, of course, focus on the 1/3 that are covered, but we need also to then focus on the 2/3 that are not covered. We also know that without no global deal on climate change, CO2 emissions globally are rising, and biodiversity in the developing world steadily being lost. And the level of aid, as I said, from traditional donors is under pressure for competing demands. We must work even harder to reach the MDGs. The 750 days, as I mentioned, are extremely important. I'm particularly concerned about girls' access to education and the health of girls and women in poor countries. The government of Norway will now escalate the work we're doing in education. No education, no development. Unfortunately, we have seen in the last 8 years that in Norway, the proportion on our ODA budget that is used on education has gone from 12% of the educational budget was in 2005 used on education. Today, we are under 6%. I think education done in the right way, as I also previously mentioned, is one of the best investments that we can make, and especially investments in girls' education. We know that a girl attending school will marry and have children later. Both mother and child are more likely to survive birth, and the mother will be able to nourish her children because she's more likely to get a safer and better paid job. So education is key. The strong progress in primary education enrollment has unfortunately stagnated since 2008, and several countries risk not reaching the education MDG by 2015. That's why we're also already in next year's budget, we're scaling up the amount of resources we use on education, and we will continue to do so in the coming years. And the paradox is that the last 10% of the children, I said that 9 out of 10 now goes to school, but the last 10% of children who are not attending school is particularly difficult to reach. Of course, some of them also live in areas that we see war and conflict. And more than half of these children live in sub-Saharan Africa, in fragile states or conflict zones, or they are children with disabilities. And this is not acceptable. In 2014, as I said, we will increase our investments in education by 240 million Norwegian kroner. So for our international friends, this is around 50 million US dollars. But there is more coming in the years to come. In the health sector, dealing with HIV/AIDS epidemic has taught us valuable lessons. In the 90s, contracting HIV/AIDS was too often the equivalent to a death sentence. Medication was unavailable or too expensive. Then governments, grassroots movements, local communities, civil societies, NGOs, and multilateral organizations mobilized. New initiatives such as the Global Fund for HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria, the US President's emergency plan for AIDS relief, and etc. have pushed down consumer prices of medication in poor countries. The Global Fund for HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis has contributed to saving 8.7 million lives. When I was reading this last night, I was thinking, how much it really matters, the work we're doing here. That only one fund can contribute in such a way to then saving 8.7 million lives. So I think we're all at this conference, we are privileged in the sense that we're working with the most important thing in life. And I was mentioning Nelson Mandela at the start. How can we make sure that people that don't have the opportunities that we have, for example, in Norway, also will have those opportunities in the future. And how can we form a policy that is proactive, future-oriented, and ambitious enough that we can reach these goals? As I said, we have also seen significant progress in other parts of the health sector. The Vaccine Alliance, Gavi, has contributed to saving over 5 million lives by vaccinating children in partnership with UNICEF and WHO. That's also quite an impressive number. 5 million children. Think of that, 5 million children. Norway and other donors are working to provide better access also to safe and inexpensive contraceptives for poor women, and a trust fund in the World Bank, financed by Norway and others, is supporting the introduction of results-based and cost-efficient financing in health systems. We must continue to make progress. Our government will have a high level on the development assistance budget. We will also have a firm focus on results, and this is also a focus on the report that we have on our table today. Systematic evaluations to guide future budget allocations, and openness on the effect of Norwegian development cooperation. This is what I think also the Norwegians do expect from us. We must learn from the past to know how best we can allocate future resources. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, for me, as I said, it's a great privilege to be here. I also think it's a great privilege to have a report from Norad that focuses on results. I think together this is a great brainstorming, not only on looking at the past, but as Churchill once said, the farther backward you can look, the farther forward you're likely to see. And based on the results of the MDGs, I'm sure that if we work together, we can also achieve at least the same results in the 16 years to come. And I would like, on behalf of the Norwegian government, to be a partner with you, if you come from an international organization, or if you're representing an NGO in Norway, or if you're representing the private sector, or even work with the government. I think together we have a lot to do, and let's just get started. Thank you.